Firestein, and appreciate you guys making the time for this session today. I was approached pretty recently about speaking to resilience, and I wanted to include some others that I've come across as part of my role in the Abilities Network, which is the ERG in the U.S. supporting individuals with disabilities. So it's both myself and Steven Tyler from the UK, who will be sharing some stories about our journey, what we've dealt with, and how we've tried to show resilience throughout. This first slide, it's actually of me. A couple months ago, I was at an event at a large university in the US where we got to showcase some of our product, as you could see, to attract students to our company. And so it was a great opportunity for me to be around folks in early career and students and help recruit. And I've been with the company 17 years. Most of it's been in talent acquisition. And I wear a lot of different hats beyond just my role. I like to, a few hobbies, cyclist, love podcasts, got a family, 3 kids, very active in the community. But I really enjoy what we do as far as diversity with our employee resource group, where I can work with others that are impacted by disabilities and help them, be, open and get support and reduce barriers. And that's been a big focus for me the last few years. The reason I got involved, and I think we'll get into this next slide, is a couple of years ago, it was in 2018, I was started to experience some challenges with my mobility as I was taking long walks, started to have a limp, and sought some support and wanted to figure out what was going on. And it was determined that I had a condition called MS. And for those who've never heard that acronym, it stands for multiple sclerosis. And so this next slide, I want to get into what that is, because I'd never heard of it. And when I heard that, it was pretty, alarming to me, because for me, it was association with wheelchairs and walking canes. I had no idea what it was and, how prominent it is across the world. I think what I've seen, 2.3 million people are afflicted with it globally, and in the US, it's over 1 million. And it's a disease that's centers on the immune system. So essentially, the system that I have that is usually combating COVID and colds is programmed a little differently. So it goes after my nervous system. So the network of signals that travel throughout my body to operate the different functions. My system, it actually attacks the myelin coating, so the protective barriers around those fibers, and essentially causes disruption around that. So the signals that travel from my brain to my arms, my legs, it doesn't operate as efficiently as it could, and so I have symptoms. So that's how it manifests with me. But for others, it's different. With individuals that get diagnosed, usually it's between the age of 20 to 50. So they're born no issues, and then somewhere along their life journey they get hit with this news. Demographically, it does skew more towards women than men, about 2.5 to 3 to 1 ratio there. And then also geographically, it's one of those unique conditions that tends to center away from the equator. So in the US, it's sort of the northern Midwest areas, northern parts. In Europe, UK, it tends to go away from the equator. Causes, it's either environment, genetic. They don't have an idea of what is the real cause. I think it's a combination. If you've got a father who has it, or a twin, you're more likely to have this condition. And then, like I said, the environment where you're located could be a factor as well. Next slide, please. This gives you a sense visually what I'm talking about as far as the immune system. It does attack those cells in your nervous system, which then disrupt those signals. So you could see the green arrow that flows through what they call myelinated nerve fibers. And when your immune system goes after it, it disrupts it. In the next slide, it gets into, if you could move over to that, yep, to the symptoms. And what I've seen in talking to others, and so I've gotten closer to this community as over the last 5 years since my diagnosis, it affects, individuals so differently. One of the primary factors is fatigue. That's an area that hits me as well. So, it's like clockwork every day at like 3 to 4 o'clock. I tend to get my low point on my energy. And I've talked to that in previous sessions that, you can strategize a way to cope with that where, coffee and caffeine can only get you so far, but you have to manage your day in a different way, which I've adapted my lifestyle to do that. Others, that I've encountered as far as vision. So I've talked to, some patients that will lose half of their vision through this at times, and then it comes back. There's issues with their arms and legs as far as my gait. When I walk, I have a limp. There's mood swings. And fortunately for me, the cognitive impact has been less. So I've been able to continue my work and focus. I was able to get a diagnosis pretty early. So after I started to experience the limp, I was able to go see a specialist. I thought it was a back issue. I'm getting old. You're going to get a pinched nerve. That's just what happens. But then I spoke to a neurologist, and they said you need to go through the MRI. You get a spinal tap to verify that you've got this. And that to me was a lessons learned. You get one opinion from somebody. You've got to seek additional experts to say, is this what I have? And get to the bottom of this. Don't take one opinion, work to get the interventions, figure out if you do have this condition so that you can get a treatment plan in place very quickly. And then as far as I think the next slide. Yeah, here's some resources that I've discovered, because I do think if you're going to be confronted with this, finding out the right story. So getting the resources, getting connected to a specialist that can get you diagnosed. When I think about the resilience that I've had to bring up, it's been, for me, it's about, what are my physical issues? What I've been able to do to address this through my own behavioral changes, through the different foods that I eat. I've had to complete an inventory of everything that my lifestyle is, and how can I adjust it to make my conditions better. And I have a 6-month infusion treatment that I go through where I get a medicine that gets injected into my body to essentially reprogram my immune system so that it is what you would almost call immunocompromised. So it's not going to attack my nervous system, but it's also not going to be as effective against the common cold and COVID and all of that. So for me, getting that in place was a game changer. So I've been able to slow the progression, avoid, the walking cane, avoid those things that can help me be productive. And, when Steven and I had connected on this, he said that he'd met someone with MS who had a very positive disposition. I don't think there's necessarily a secret sauce as far as being resilient if you've got a physical issue like this. I think you're either born with a good disposition or you're often miserable no matter what you have. And I've encountered patients that have been very positive and they're dealing with this. And I still maintain that positive outlook throughout all of my journeys, that I'm going to work through whatever I'm going to come at me. And, I'm going to live in the moment and work through this, while others, they just think of this as there's no hope. And I think for me, it's trying to encourage those that there is interventions for you. If you are confronted for this, and that was one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to speak today, is that if you have family members or if you ever experience symptoms like the ones we listed on this chart, it's so important that you get to these websites, you get connected to a specialist who can get you diagnosed, because the earlier you get diagnosed, the faster you can get a treatment plan. And then this lifestyle, you'll be able to work through things. So that's been my biggest takeaway from this whole experience over the last 5 years. It has definitely been a journey, but I've got a great support network around me, both at Rolls-Royce, through my family, and through the healthcare system. So that's been, I guess, the key points that I wanted to share. I'll stop and don't know if there's any questions. I'll do my best to answer anything healthcare wise. I'm not a clinical specialist, but if you have any questions around what my journey has gone through, I'm happy to answer it. Okay. I'm going to pivot over to Steven so that we can hear his story from attention deficit disorder. So up to you, Steven.
Thanks, Brooke. So I'm Steve Tyler. I've worked at Rolls-Royce for quite a while now, 40 years. Celebrated my 40th year at Rolls-Royce back end of last year, actually. I work in engineering operations management. Went to Hertfordshire University. And that's a picture of me. It's not quite as exciting as Brooke's, I think. That's my back garden. But one of the things I like to do actually is gardening. So this year I'm looking to get a few more plants around the borders. So I've got a little bit on the bottom right about hobbies. So I'm a keyboard player. Been a keyboard player for many years in various bands, and I enjoy that. And I enjoy cycling, gardening, reading, and listening to music. Now, I was approached not that long ago because as part of the Abilities Network, I did a presentation about obsessive compulsive disorder about a year ago. And I was invited to share some thoughts with yourselves on that particular condition. So I will aim to try and be as informative on OCD as Brooke has been on MS. I will try to do that. Just to the left.
I got my acronym wrong on attention deficit. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to.
That's okay. No problem. So yeah, I've tried to think about this in the context of resilience. So my take on resilience, it's coping with challenges that life throws at you. And my particular challenge, and it has been for many years, is living with obsessive compulsive disorder. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about that condition. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide is just a kind of overview of what I would like to cover today. So a little bit about the condition, how it manifests. I can give you a few anecdotes about how it applies to me, a bit on coping strategies in treatments, and I have a last slide that just points to some useful resources, a bit like Brooke's slide on MS. So that's what I'm looking to cover. So if we skip to the next slide. Right. Now, obsessive compulsive disorder is not that uncommon. So the chances are there's quite a few folks on the call who have at least encountered or heard of OCD. But if you haven't, essentially, the acronym is about obsession, compulsion, and disorder. And what this is all about is an obsession is a persistent thought that creates a state of anxiety in the person. And a compulsion is a need to act on that thought to try and bring your anxiety level down. And disorder is when this takes over your life. Now, in itself, that probably doesn't mean a lot. So I need to explore this a bit further to try and illustrate what it's like to have OCD. So I'd ask you to think about the situations below, just to try and illustrate what OCD might feel like. So, for instance, have you ever left the house with the door open or unlocked, or thought you had left your cooker on or a tap running, or thought you had left your car headlights on? Actually, that doesn't tend to happen too much these days because most cars have buzzers to tell you that you've left your car headlights on. Another one that might be more common these days is you've left your mobile phone somewhere and it's probably in the house, or in your car, but at the back of your mind, you're not entirely sure and you think you might have lost it. Now, if you've experienced a situation like that, the chances are you're a little bit uncomfortable with the situation. So that's where I'm coming from with try and picture a state of anxiety. And if you can think of a situation like that for yourself, ask yourself, did you feel a need to go back and check? Could you get on with your day without exploring this, going back and checking that you haven't left your tap running or your phone somewhere? Now, if you did, that's not that uncommon. All I'm asking you to do is try and picture that sort of state of anxiety that you've done something and you're not sure and you're a little bit uncomfortable. That is kind of the starting point for OCD. So if we go to the next slide. Right. Now I'm gonna try and explain it a little bit further now. So there are different ways OCD manifests. I think I'll try and explain it through hand washing. So during COVID, we were kind of educated in, if you wash your hands for 20 seconds with soap, you've a pretty good chance that you have killed any germs on your hands. Okay. Now, somebody with OCD might wash their hands for 20 seconds and they'll go to finish washing their hands and their brain says, that's not enough, mate. Sorry. There's a slight risk that you've left a germ on your finger. You better do it again. And then you can get into a cycle where your brain's telling you you haven't done enough. If you stop now, oh dear, disastrous things are going to happen. You're going to come down with some horrible bug. You must go back and do it again. And somebody with OCD is likely to end up in a loop like that, where and the next thing you know, you've done it 27 times. Your skin's very sore and you can't stop. And that's kind of the sort of mindset, if you like. It's your brain playing tricks on you to some extent, not allowing you to recover and be comfortable about the fact you finished something. Now, these are ritualistic behaviors. So somebody with OCD, you might spot them washing their hands 5 times. Less of one from me. I'm more of the second, safety checks, where you might need to check something multiple times because you can't quite believe that you've done it, and your brain's telling you, no, okay, I've gone back in the house and checked the cookers off 5 times, but I still don't quite believe that I've done it. So let me go back in another time and do it. Now, if we hark back to disorder, at the root of this, there might be some rationale. With washing hands, there is some rationale, a rational basis for it initially, that you don't want to come down with a bug. But where it becomes a disorder is where it moves from rational to irrational. And the third one is a good example. That's superstitious checks. So somebody with OCD might find that they have trouble leaving the room if they haven't switched the lights on and off 5 times. That or touch something a certain number of times. And it's without kind of getting into your head the anxiety, it's hard to understand why they might do it, because you might say, well, just stop. But what it is this anxiety that drives the compulsion to do something. And the underlying thing is fear. So it's fear that something bad will happen. So superstitious checks, switching a light on and off 5 times before leaving a room. You think, well, there's no rational basis for it. It's just something in the mindset of the person that says, if I don't do that, something bad will happen. So I better do it. Now, I'm very familiar with these things because, as I say, I've been living with OCD since about 10, I think. It's kind of when it first manifested. So I'll give you a few personal illustrations. So when I was about 10, I remember I had a cupboard as a kid with where I put my shoes in, and I had about 4 pairs of shoes, and I got into the habit of rearranging them very tidily. Oh, I'm seeing some questions coming in about has RR been supportive with my needs? I'll touch on that because actually the answer is yes. And there's a question about cycling for both of us. Yeah, again, I'll touch on that one because I come on to exercise later on. Right, now, so examples. Yeah, tidying shoes. And I couldn't, I had to keep going back because it wasn't quite right. And I wasn't uncomfortable and I had to keep going back. And I don't know why. And then I found that before I could leave a room, I got into a habit of touching the net curtains 3 times before leaving the room. And then it went up to 5 times because that was a better number. And that was kind of my first experience, if you like. And from the age of 10, I found myself kind of developing these little routines. Now, at 20, I was at university. Got another question coming in about how to stop repetitive behavior. So I'm going to touch on that in an upcoming slide about coping strategies. Right now, so at university, I actually failed the second year of my university course because I reached a point where I was not learning anything. It was back in the days when we had handwritten notes, and I could not live with my notes, and I was constantly rewriting. Oh, yeah, they're handwritten, and we had Tipex back then, so I was constantly Tipexing and rewriting and trying to get the notes to the point where I was comfortable with them, and didn't really learn anything. And that was when I was first diagnosed. And actually, what worked for me is I moved from Bath University to Hertfordshire University in the change in environment, and I lived on campus, and all the things that went with that helped me. So it's basically the change that helped me through that. 20 years later, I bought a Windows PC. I installed the software. It came up with some errors. I reinstalled the software. It came up with some different errors. Next thing I know, I've reinstalled the software 75 times. And I couldn't stop. And what I remember one weekend where it was lovely weather, and I do like to go out cycling. And I woke up Saturday morning, and I knew that I would not get out of the house that day because I knew I was going to be locked into reinstalling Windows software on a PC for the whole day because I couldn't get comfortable with all the errors that were coming up every time I did it. And at that point, I got medication, therapy, private therapy through the Priory, and I joined a group as well, which was very interesting and helped me a lot. More recently, COVID lockdown, intrusive thoughts. Now, intrusive thoughts are compulsions to do something. You don't know why. And I'll give you an example. Not too long ago, the thought came into my head, well, what happens if you short the element of a toaster out to the casing? Will it burn the element of the toaster out, or will the safety mechanism, the RCD device in my house, trip before it happens? And I just could not get that thought out of my head. And it was going round and round and round. And eventually, I gave in on that one, and I did the experiment. It's one of these "don't try this at home, kids" experiments because it involves shorting out an element of a toaster to the casing. And lo and behold, what I found out was that it did actually burn the element of the toaster out before it tripped the RCD. So at that point, I could rest easy because I knew the answer, and my brain was telling me, "Okay, that you can park that one." These are all examples of. I'm trying to paint a picture, if you like, of what it's like to live with OCD. Now, I know I'm in good company. So at the bottom of that slide, there are some quite famous folks who have admitted publicly to a problem with OCD. Howard Hughes is an interesting one. I don't, if ever you get a chance or have seen The Aviator, Howard Hughes was a very clever man. But he did have quite a serious OCD problem, and The Aviator illustrates that well. And in fact, I think the chap who played him in the film, I think, was Leonardo DiCaprio, which is interesting because he also has OCD. Might be one of the reasons why he went for the part. Okay, so that's an attempt to paint a picture of what it's like to have OCD. If we move to the next slide, I'm going to try and show some things about what you can do about it. So, treatments for OCD. Medication is the standard treatment that GPs tend to go to unless you have access to therapy. Now, all medication does, serotonin reuptake inhibitors, it kind of relaxes you, takes your anxiety levels down, and you're better able to cope with OCD as a consequence. Of course, the downside of that is these medications, they can impair function. You can feel tired. They have side effects, basically. Now, I wanted to touch on a very specific coping technique, cognitive behavioral therapy. I found it very powerful. What cognitive behavioral therapy does is it attempts to retrain your brain. So basically, me as a person with OCD, I have slightly unusual wiring in my brain that creates these states of anxiety. And what CBT does is it forces you to confront it. So say, for example, you have a ritual where you have to switch the lights on and off 5 times before you leave a room. With CBT, what you do is you say, right, today I'm going to leave this room for 5 minutes before going back and completing my ritual. This afternoon, I'm going to leave the room for 10 minutes. And actually, it works, or at least in my experience, it works. So I'm quite in control of rituals these days, purely as a result of that CBT therapy. And it needs a technique like that. It's not good enough. I'm thinking back to the question about what you do to stop somebody with these kind of repetitive behaviors, is it doesn't work just to say don't do it. It just does not work. You have to help them understand it if it's really bad, that they do have something that needs addressing. And the good news is, with this condition, there are techniques that work, like cognitive behavioral therapy. Incidentally, CBT can also help with phobias like agoraphobia. So I went to group therapy. I mentioned group therapy. I went to a group that had a few agoraphobics. They had to be taken to the group by car because they were scared to get out of the house. I mean, agoraphobia is fear of open spaces. And this technique was used in that group. And I remember one person had agoraphobia. And the way it worked is you leave the house and go to your gate. Then the next day you leave the house and go 10 yards past your gate. Next day, further. And I remember at this group meeting, we had a lady who came in and she said, I have left my house and walked 3 blocks. I went back again. And there were great cheers, because that for her was a fantastic step. So I'm a very great advocate of CBT for my condition. Now, in context of resilience, there are other coping strategies. I've separated them out a bit because I think the next block of coping strategies are useful more broadly, just to cope with the things that life throws at you. So they may seem quite obvious, but it's practicing them that counts. So talking to folks who care about you. mindfulness apps. There are lots of websites and apps around that explore mindfulness. It's like meditation techniques, relaxing music. There are things that can help reduce anxiety generally. For me, I find listening to music does. And I mentioned I play in a band, so playing an instrument does for me. And of course, exercise and diet. These are generally good things for mental well-being. So for myself, I have to try and keep my mental well-being under control, and that deals with the OCD. So if I'm in a good frame of mind, my OCD is less of a problem. Now, personally, I find that these coping strategies are hardest to do when I'm down. So that's something else to bear in mind. A question about mindfulness apps. I can't really suggest a mindfulness app because I've not explored them too much myself. I tended to explore things like listening to music. All I can say on mindfulness apps is if you Google mindfulness, there is a wealth of information there. And I think my last slide has a link to something on it. Okay, so this thing about coping strategies, for me, it's recognizing for myself when I'm not quite right. Then I need to put the effort in. And it's a bit periodic OCD. So there are times in my life when it's worse than others. And times when I need to do something about it, like therapy, revisit therapy, or general coping strategies. So that's OCD for me. If we move on to the next slide. Yes. This is a recent one, actually. COVID has been quite a challenging time for me. I live on my own, so and I've been doing homeworking, and it creates a lot of space to have OCD type thoughts and intrusive thoughts and ritual behaviors. So recently, I've invested in some kit. It's smart lighting, an Xbox to play music on, little disco lights, and actually I've been finding that this has been quite helpful to me. So on an evening lately, I've been putting some music on and putting this light show on, and it takes me away from everything. So it's different answers for different people. That's a recent one for me that I've been exploring, and it's been working quite well. If we move on to the last slide. So again, a bit like with MS, there are plenty of resources around. I've put a link there to one, the UK OCD organisation, and it's a good place to understand more about the condition. Yeah, going back to a question about if you spot it in somebody else, what to do about it. Well, hopefully, me painting a picture of what the condition, how the condition manifests, will at least help you maybe spot that kind of behavior. Like I say, it's difficult to help further without somebody accepting that they have a problem, because you really need techniques like group therapy and CBT to really get to grips with a serious condition. Now there are shades of this. There are folks who get through life with mild OCD and don't really have a problem. It's when you find you have a friend who just does not leave the house for some reason, and you find that it's because they have this condition and it's taken over. That's when it's time really to help your friend in act. Other links on that page. There's some Rolls-Royce links there. There was a question earlier about how did Rolls-Royce help me? Yes, my therapy at the Priory was through Rolls-Royce. Now, at the time, I think my manager recommended it. These days, the route in is through the employee assistance program, so the onus is more on the individual to actually request it. But if you seek help, there is help. and other things that Rolls-Royce have done for me. When I was an apprentice and I failed my second year as an undergrad apprentice, the normal route would be, you've lost your job, mate. In my case, Rolls-Royce understood. And I've been at Rolls-Royce for 40 years now as a consequence of that. So I did not lose my job. I was supported through the condition. My useful resources, I couldn't resist adding one at the end about a book that I came across that is a general recommended reading for coping with changes in life. It's called Who Might Move My Cheese by Spencer Johnson. That helped me through some transformation activities at Rolls-Royce, where I was displaced from one job and ended up in another. It's a good book, so I've just put that on the end of my slide. Okay, so I think that's the end of my presentation. So there's now a bit of time for questions on either,
I did want to respond. Yeah, a couple of questions. So the cycling piece was one that, I enjoy cycling myself. And for me, I've had to be very aware of my surroundings. So my balance isn't what it used to be. So I'm constantly thinking about, okay, is my body positioned the right way? Am I doing things, very carefully? And that's similar to just walking around the office. Like, I'm constantly paranoid about things that might be a cord on the ground or something that could trip me up, because I've got a condition that's a symptom of MS called foot drop, that my foot doesn't automatically flex up. And so I've had to adapt to that. I've got a foot brace, but sometimes, I can't wear it. And so, that's one where I'm very aware of my surroundings. As far as the support, I think for Rolls-Royce, the support's there. You just have to seek it out. So, or talk to your manager about it. It's one that if you go on the engine room, or if you have conversations with your people leader about, this is what's going on with me, I've not had any sort of negative, response from my manager or anything. It's about, okay, let's look at your schedule. Let's see what we can do and make this work. And to me, that's what I've received. It's about seeking out that support. So, I don't know if we have any other questions. We do not have any other questions. And so I think, Steven, did you have any other closing thoughts? Anything else we want to wrap up with?
Closing thoughts. Well, hopefully between the two of us, we've provided an insight into both of these conditions. And for me, that's good enough. If in my case, if I've given you some insight into the condition, that's great. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess for me, for those who may not have any sort of connection with an employee resource group, I would strongly encourage anyone who currently works for Rolls-Royce, if they have heard of one that they have an affinity towards, or want to connect with, either one of our, so we have the Abilities Network and the Open Network in the UK for individuals with disabilities, but there are so many other groups that it just, allows you to have a safe space, be yourself. Just strongly encourage you to get involved with one to help your own journey as you move through the organization. We do have a last question. What does resilience mean to you? I think, I guess for me, it's just, living in the moment, taking these challenges on, because, being aware of your own body and listening to yourself, listening to your body to understand what limitations you have, because everyone has limitations. Although, I may not be able to dunk a basketball, that's okay. LeBron James doesn't get to support development of a global talent pipeline strategy, so that's his loss. And so I am excited about the things that I have in front of me, and, appreciate what I have. So, Steven, any thoughts on what resilience means to you?
Basically what it means to me is getting on with life in the face of challenges that life throws at you. In my case, OCD is the main one, and it's the exploring the techniques. I mean, if I think of myself, I don't think of myself as a naturally resilient person. It's part of who I am with OCD. So I need to explore techniques to help me with resilience. So that's kind of what it means for me. I think that's a poll question to everybody, isn't it? What does resilience mean to you? Yeah, I'm getting the nod.
Okay. Sorry, I was trying to answer that myself.
I don't know about books on resilience. There's I'm not sure of any off the top of my head. I'm sure there is plenty of material out there. Aside from the Coping with Change book that I've already recommended.
I mean, I don't remember the title of it, but I know there was a famous book that became a movie about a guy who was a runner and was captured in World War II. And that one has always stuck with me as somebody who dealt with huge adversity of, the worst conditions, but kept through it and, looked at his situation and didn't go to the dark places and just say, I'm not, how am I going to get out of this? It's about looking at every day, figuring out how we can, keep one foot in front of the other, keep walking, keep pushing forward. And eventually, things will change and work, as if they can to work through it. And so I think we all dealt with that during COVID times with lockdowns and when is this ever going to end? But it's, the short wins that you can get to see, if they'll pile up and work themselves out. I think we're good on questions. Appreciate everyone's time. I know it's in the US, if you joined, it was during your lunchtime. So thank you. And at the end of the day, where you're ready to go home. So those in the UK, thanks so much for carving out time during your day to hear Steven and I share our stories, and hope it was helpful, insightful for you. And thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
To find out more about starting your career at Rolls-Royce, check out our socials or search Rolls-Royce Early Careers. Be real, be curious, be ready, be you. Be Rolls-Royce.